Charles III was, for over half a century, the Prince of Wales. In that time, his love for the country and its people has been plain to see.
It's like he's been here for life. You know, he's one of us.
Whenever I've met him, it always just seems to be that we're laughing.
Over many decades, he's worked hard to find a way to help others achieve success.
His love for charity and the commitment that people put into charity should never be underestimated.
When he speaks to you, he makes you feel as though he's interested in what you're saying.
His love of the language and culture has promoted Wales on the world stage.
He liked to hear Welsh music. He liked the image the harp was, the cultural connection.
And the landscape and traditions of Wales have helped to shape the opinions of our new monarch.
He cares about beauty, he cares about history, and he cares about people.
What has the Prince done for Wales? He's loved it. And I think that's the most important thing you could ask of anybody.
Now Charles is king, and the years of service to Wales have helped prepare him for his future.
Whatever you think of the institution, this has sort of been on his shoulders since birth. I think Charles will make a great king.
It has just been announced from Buckingham Palace that Her Royal Highness, the Princess Elizabeth, Duchess of Edinburgh, was safely delivered of a prince at 9:14 p.m. and that Her Royal Highness and her son are both doing well.
3 years after the end of the Second World War, on the 14th of November 1948, her future king was born into an age of austerity.
All-night crowds are rewarded by the bulletin announcing that Her Royal Highness and her son are both doing well.
The prince, named Charles Philip Arthur George, was second in line to the throne.
It was a huge moment for the monarchy because this was shoring up their future, and it was a happy celebratory moment in a post-war era where people were really clamouring for things to celebrate.
Sightseers were waiting to watch the arrival of royal guests for the christening ceremony of the infant prince.
The whole family gathered for the ceremony. Elizabeth's father, King George VI, had been on the throne for just 12 years, leading the country through the dark days of the Second World War.
It was a difficult period for the royal family following the abdication of Edward VIII, and King George VI found himself in a role that he'd never imagined he would be in. So seeing his daughter give birth to a son and an heir must have been hugely encouraging and meant a great deal for the future of the monarchy.
In 1952, Princess Elizabeth became queen following the death of her father, George VI. On the cinema newsreels of the era, Welsh people watched the royal children grow up.
The vast majority of Welsh people believed in Wales's place within the United Kingdom. Believing in the royal family was that was what the majority of Welsh people did.
Life for those Welsh cinema audiences was very different. The economy was slow to recover from the Second World War, and some began to feel that Wales was being ignored by the government in London.
There was starting to be a profound sense that Welsh culture was in decline. Chapel attendance was in decline, the Welsh language was in decline, and that awakens a people's sense of Welshness in many ways, and it creates a sense, amongst some people at least, that unless the Welsh people stood up for themselves, their country, their culture was going to fade away. And government is very sensitive to this. Government is worried that it hasn't listened to Welsh opinion enough.
I am happy and proud that at last Wales enjoys a capital city.
There are a series of, in some ways, symbolic acts which are meant to recognise Welsh nationality. Cardiff is made capital city in 1955. the Welsh dragon is recognised as the official Welsh flag. Welsh nationalism in the 1950s is still very much a minority opinion, but there's the fear that if insulted, if Welsh opinion is insulted and marginalised, it might grow.
In 1958, as a further nod to its status, the new capital was chosen as the venue for the British Empire and Commonwealth Games.
I remember I was in junior school and the excitement around the Commonwealth Games and the Empire Games as it was at that time, and having to learn about the Empire. I remember those large maps, coloured pink, showed the supremacy of Britain.
During the closing ceremony, the crowd was to hear a momentous announcement.
I want to take this opportunity of speaking to all Welsh people. I intend to create my son Charles, Prince of Wales, today.
Here and there one can hear small groups of Welshmen beginning to sing God Bless the Prince of Wales, a song, of course, which has not been heard for very many years in the Principality.
We were all quite excited about it, but not really understanding, and certainly not having any sense of what it meant to us as individuals or as a group of children living in what was then Tiger Bay.
In his first television interview, the 20-year-old prince recalled the moment.
I remember sitting in the headmaster's study at Cheam, and we were all watching the television, and there were several other boys there, little ones. I remember being acutely embarrassed when it was announced, and I had this marvellous great cheer coming from the stadium in Cardiff. And I think for a little boy of 9, it was rather bewildering. I seem to remember, all the others turned and looked at me in sort of amazement.
The title had last been given to Charles's uncle, the future Edward VIII, in 1911.
Proud Carnarvon received once more its promised English prince, Prince Edward.
But its history dates back 700 years to King Edward I.
Edward I claimed the title for his son, for the heir to the throne, really as a way of demonstrating he has now conquered Wales and he's in control. He's taken their title and given it to his son. And I think we have to see the announcement of Charles as the Prince of Wales as part of that story. It is part of the British establishment trying to recognise Welshness.
Will have probably provoked quite mixed reactions in people. On the one hand, they may have found it slightly bizarre that a little boy was taking on this huge role. On the other hand, huge excitement to see the Queen with her heir.
As the future king entered his teenage years, a new decade began. The 60s was the era of the protest movement, and in Wales, campaigners took to the streets. In northwest Wales, the village of Capel was flooded, making the Tryweryn Valley a reservoir to supply the people of Liverpool. It was seen as an all-out attack on the traditional Welsh-speaking heartland.
Gwynfor Richard Evans, 1,015.
In Westminster, there was alarm as the first Plaid Cymru MP was elected.
I therefore declare Gwynfor Richard Evans duly elected.
So the Labour government is worried about the rise of Welsh nationalism. And the pressures on the royal family to actually hold an investiture do seem to have come from central government rather than the royal family itself. The royal family does seem to have wanted to kind of hold Charles back a little bit from the spotlight.
Plans to crown Charles Prince of Wales at Caernarfon were drawn up. The date was set for July 1969. To the surprise of many, it was also announced that Charles, who was studying at Cambridge, would spend a term at a Welsh university.
So Charles is sent off to Aberystwyth to learn Welsh. It's meant to be a symbolic kind of statement that he's not an English prince, he's not a foreigner, he's part of Welsh culture.
The university chose Dr. Teddy Millward, a former vice president of Plaid Cymru, as the prince's tutor.
Pa mor awyddus ydy'r tywysog i ddysgu Cymraeg? Mae'n awyddus iawn i wedi gallai weld, a dwi ddim yn cael dim trafferth i ddynwared seiniau'r iaith, chwaith.
I think that the government's idea was to calm down the growth of nationalism in Wales. Look, your prince is learning Welsh, was a Welsh speaker. He was living in Pantycelyn Hostel. It was a Welsh-speaking community. The students had decided not to talk English to him at all, you know.
Protests greeted Charles's arrival. 4 students went on hunger strike, whilst others took to the streets.
Pam eich bod chi yn erbyn i'r tywysog ddod i Aberystwyth?
Wel, mae'n amlwg mae dod yma i leddfu teimladau'r Cymru mae, a dyna'r cwbl. Dwi'n gweld hyn yn ddim byd, ond move tric politicaidd.
Does na ddim croeso yng Nghymru i dywysog. Does na hawl foesol i fod yma.
I think he was somewhat annoyed at being dragged out of Cambridge, and I sympathised with him on that, you know.
I think out of certain necessity, I've perhaps been more lonely, if they like it. I mean, I haven't made a lot of friends, if that's what they mean, and I haven't been to a lot of parties or anything. There haven't been very many. And I've had a lot of other things to do.
The fact he comes under the influence of Teddy Millward does seem to have rubbed off on him. It does seem to have woken him up to why there was a controversy.
He was learning that Wales was a Welsh-speaking Wales up to a great point.
I think they feel so strongly about Wales as a nation, and it means something to them, and they're depressed by, you know, what might happen to it if they don't try and preserve the language and the culture, which is very unique and special to Wales.
Mae'r dwy'n awr am alw ar y tywysog Charles i'n cyfarch ni yn yr iaith Gymraeg.
The prince's first speech in Welsh was in the most traditional of settings, the stage of the country's Urdd Eisteddfod. Not everyone was happy, but there were plenty who seemed delighted to welcome him.
Ar ôl I mi dreulio cymaint o'r amser yn y labordy iaith, gellwch fentro na fydda I ddim yn gadael i'r Gymraeg ddiflannu, heb ymladd. Heb ymladd hyd ar ether.
There's no doubt that the Prince, in his first major public speech in Welsh, won the hearts of the large audience in the marquee.
Nothing happens by accident when it comes to planning royal engagements, and I'm sure aides will have thought this through very carefully, and it was really important, I think, to go and approach a very important Welsh language festival in terms of diplomacy. You know, this is perhaps an audience that was harder to reach and perhaps more resistant to the idea of a Prince of Wales, and I think it was quite a shrewd move.
But for some, the strategy was almost too successful.
Certainly, government, or at least George Thomas, as Secretary of State, is worried that Charles is becoming a little bit of a nationalist. And he suggests to Harold Wilson, the Prime Minister, that he have a word with the Queen to try and, you know, to take Charles away from some of these nationalist influences.
La 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 la.
As the day of the prince's investiture approached, peaceful protesters flocked to Caernarfon. A satirical song mocking Charles's privileged background topped the Welsh pop charts.
Oh, Carlo, Carlo, Carlo Marrebolo, Carlo, Carlo.
But concerns about the royal family's safety were growing. Hardline political groups were threatening to sabotage the ceremony, and specialist police and army units were drafted into the town.
The Army's Explosive Ordnance Unit is here to deal with the bombs, real and imaginary, which are keeping Carnarvon Castle under the tightest security guard it's known for centuries.
They do have bombs. They are waging a war of violence. They even very briefly consider assassinating Prince Charles. They plant 4 bombs in Carnarvon, one of which explodes prematurely, killing the 2 people who were laying it, and another explodes when a child kicks a ball into it, and he is very seriously injured.
On the day of the investiture, Carnarvon was a nervous place.
I think you can only imagine how tense that situation must have been for all the flag-waving, jubilant crowds, knowing that there were people out there who did want to do him harm potentially. Will have been very unnerving. The age he was, he obviously hadn't had that much exposure to those kind of threats. Being centre stage like that in Wales, with all the symbolism of the role he was taking on, will have been a slightly awkward, uncomfortable moment at times, I would have thought.
250,000 people packed into the small town to welcome the royal family. At 2 in the afternoon, the ceremony began.
The Prince himself, bareheaded now in readiness for his crown, is flanked
Inside the castle, the prince pledged allegiance to his monarch and his newly adopted country.
the symbol of sovereignty.
I, Charles, Prince of Wales, do become your liege man of life and limb. It is indeed my firm intention to associate myself in word and deed with as much of the life of the principality as possible. And what a principality!
Diolch i feddwl o hynny. O, yn ymwneud lyflu. Lyflu wir. Diolch yn gosod i ar y stryd. A diolch i feddwl o hynny. Wych, rhyfeddol. Oedd pawb yn hapus, pawb yn gwenu, pawb yn canu, a pawb yn gwylio fore.
From quite a young age, he was aware of his destiny. The ritual involved in this was almost like a mini coronation, if you like. It will certainly have brought to mind his future.
A global audience of 500 million witnessed the event.
The investiture was an amazing occasion. I think it was probably the first royal occasion of which I was aware. And myself, my family, and some of my friends' families, we gathered and had a day in front of the telly watching the occasion.
Across the nation, there were celebrations.
I remember the investiture. I remember watching it on telly, and you know, it was a wonderful day. It was a lovely warm day, bright sunny day where we were anyway in Nelson. And I remember it with great fondness. I remember the party we had in school and the 6-foot tables, and it was like a day off. We had this street party and everything. It was wonderful. I wanted him to be invested every week.
It is a hit in terms of viewing figures. It is a hit in terms of the intention it wins for Wales. Opinion polls suggest that the majority of Welsh people supported it.
For the 3 days that followed, Charles toured the length and breadth of Wales. Crowds gathered wherever he went.
And I think that's what makes him so important. He didn't just become the Prince of Wales. He took on the role and he went to meet the real people of Wales, not the sort of the people who were in higher office. He went to meet those people who worked hard with their hands, who risked their lives working in steelworks and in coal mines, people who worked hard on tending the land. He went to meet real people.
At this church, the affection of Wales for her new prince is to be expressed through the traditional Gymanfa Ganu, or singing festival, in which he'll take part.
The tour ended with a recording of the BBC's Songs of Praise. The experience was a memorable one for the prince.
The prince comes down the aisle and takes his seat in the seat bow, the big seat at the front of the congregation, immediately under the pulpit.
I went to a chapel service in Morriston in Swansea, and I was completely overwhelmed emotionally by the fantastic singing that there was in that chapel, and in particular that Guide Me, O Thou Great Redeemer. And when it's really sung by a Welsh choir or a Welsh congregation, there's nothing more stirring or moving, I think.
Like, as always, coming to one of these Gymanfa Ganus is a wonderful musical experience for anybody, particularly me. And it was a great pleasure to come here this evening and to hear you all sing so beautifully and so loudly. I can never get over it. You've got nothing like this in England at all. After today, I have nothing but Welsh ringing in my ears and the voices of Welsh people.
In the years that followed, royal tradition dictated that the future king should join the armed forces. The prince trained as a pilot before serving in the Navy until 1976.
For Charles, this period in his 20s was as close to normal life as he ever got, really. He was outside palace walls. It was an opportunity to develop his skills, to do the sort of all-action hero stuff that his father was very famous for, but also, crucially, to come into contact with a lot of people from all walks of life.
Public duties, like presenting new colours to the Volunteer Battalion of Wales at Cardiff Castle, continued alongside Charles's career. Simon Weston first met the Prince of Wales whilst he was recovering from the injuries he sustained in the Falklands.
Well, Charles's role for the Welsh Guards as Colonel-in-Chief is hugely important. It gives great prominence to the regiment, but also, you know, certainly in my day, we were very proud that he was there. I've got to the point where he knows my name. He never knew it before I got injured, but he knows my name now, and we've met many times over the years. I find him very similar to his father, but not quite as blunt.
In 1981, the prince married the young and glamorous Lady Diana Spencer.
There is a bride that any man would be happy to see coming down the aisle towards him.
The fairy tale wedding captured the nation's heart, and the royal family's popularity surged.
The bride is greeted by a fanfare sounded by the state trumpeters under the portico of St. Paul's.
The royal wedding was enormous, especially in the pre-internet era. You know, people were flocked around their televisions, crowding the streets. I remember going to see Princess Diana's dress at Cardiff Castle, and that, you know, the queues were going round the block. It was incredible. There was real royal wedding fever.
It's very hard to underestimate the popularity of Diana. She is young, she's beautiful, she's modern, she's fashionable. When she hits the public scene in 1981, she is a celebrity.
It was to Wales that the prince brought his bride for her first royal tour.
I think for Prince Charles, who was the heir and was used to being in the spotlight on his own terms, must have found it quite hard to get used to the fact that his wife now commanded the headlines. When they were on tour, when they were doing walkabouts, people wanted her, and he recognised this, and I think he probably found it quite entertaining to start with, but I'm sure it will have bruised his ego somewhat.
From about the middle of the 1980s, things start to unravel and the decline sets in. The royal family and Charles are caught between a rock and a hard place. On the one hand, there's a conservative government reintroducing a market economy. On the other hand, devolution efforts in Wales are picking up. Plaid Cymru revamps its policies, and Gwynfor Evans secures a Welsh language channel.
At the time, too, the divide between rich and poor was growing. The prince's focus on his charitable work led him to take an interest in plans to regenerate Cardiff's docklands. Councillor Gaynor Legal showed him round the area, and their meeting signalled the start of a long correspondence.
For about 2 years after that, he wrote to me asking, were we getting progress? Were my fears about Cardiff Bay being realised? Were my ambitions being realised? And how could he, via his charities, help in improving the economic basis and the lives of the people who lived in Bute Town?
During the 80s, Gaynor worked for the Prince's Trust as the charity expanded its operation in Wales.
At the Prince's Trust, they worked with what they call the hardest to reach young people, and the Prince made frequent visits to Wales and to the projects, and always made a point of speaking to the young people themselves. He seemed to be truly interested.
4 decades on, the charity offers help to young people across Wales, and its leader knows all too well how much difference that can make.
I'd leave the cheese on the top because you've got enough. I think you've got enough pasta sheets in there.
As a young girl growing up in Blackwood, Sarah Jones was someone who received help from the charity.
Coming from the Welsh Valleys, where I needed an extra little bit of help, I was awarded a development award through the Prince's Trust. Not only did it allow me to sort of undertake my dream of starting my career as a tennis player, which I went on to do, but it changed my perception and my understanding of the world. It gave me opportunities to travel. It meant that somebody somewhere saw potential in me, even though they didn't know me.
He reacts when he sees a need for help. His aides have often talked about the regular phone calls, the constant desire for updates. He's someone who works incredibly hard, and I think he recognises his huge privilege and does what he can to draw attention to those with far less privilege.
Another young woman who has benefited from the charity is Destiny Kirk. She met Charles during the pandemic.
I was a bit nervous when they said who was coming. I was like, okay, hopefully this goes well. But he was the nicest person I've ever met, asked really good questions about my business, made me feel supported, and it was a really nice interaction. There was funding involved, which was great, so I could make sure I could truly launch. And they also provided a mentor for 2 years. So I was like, that's like the best option, really.
With the support of the Prince's Trust, Destiny's marketing business has gone from strength to strength.
Without this business, I think I just would have taken another job that was fun, but this is my passion, so it's helping people follow their passions.
People of all ages have benefited from the support of the Prince's charities over the years. But there have been times when the royal family itself wasn't popular.
The 1990s are possibly the most difficult decade for the royal family, and for Charles in particular. In 1991, Charles and Diana separate, and the public largely blames Charles for their separation. It gets worse in 1997. Diana dies. At the end of the 1990s, Charles is in a situation where he does not enjoy popularity with the public.
Good morning. And it is a very good morning in Wales. Today is one of the most important days in the history of our country.
In 1997, the people voted for devolution.
Paradoxically, devolution may have come to Charles's rescue because, against the advice of the Home Office, the Queen decides to open the first Assembly of Wales in 1999.
So there we have the Queen, the Duke and Prince Charles all riding together. I think it's the first time for some 30 years that all three have been in Wales, the last occasion being the investiture of the Prince of Wales.
I think it added weight and gravitas and support in the public's mind to a new institution. And I do think this goes back as well to some clever operation by the Assembly itself, because lacking legitimacy as the Assembly did, this presented on a plate an opportunity to show that this was a proper functioning democratic institution that was to serve the people of Wales.
30 years since he first started to get to grips with the language, Charles chose to address the Assembly only in Welsh.
Mae hwn yn ddiwrnod hanesyddol I Gymru. Chi, drigain aelod cyntaf y cynulliad, sy'n cael y fraint o greu hanes. Hoffwn ddimuniwn da I chi, bob un ohonoch, o waelod calon.
Charles suddenly became a bit more prominent in Welsh life from the point of devolution, and I think that it was important to keep the monarchy connected to Wales and to focus on those links at a point when Wales was gaining increasing independence.
The Assembly has gone from being effectively a very poor, weak model of devolved powers to the equivalent of a proper parliament, and that's reflected in the name Senedd Cymru. And I think Prince Charles's observations of that would have been reflected in the way in which he engaged with not only the Senedd, but with the First Minister and the Welsh Government as well.
The Prince accompanied the Queen at the opening of every session, most recently with Camilla, Duchess of Cornwall, by his side. His marriage to Camilla in 2005 had signalled the start of a more settled time. The pair were regular visitors at that landmark occasion, the Royal Welsh Show. The Prince was keen to influence the farming community.
Always remember that agriculture is exactly that, a culture and a way of life, not just yet another industrial process.
The former president of the show has seen the Prince's passion for agriculture at first hand.
It's always a joy to take rank because he's madly enthusiastic about all things country. He understands about how you breed sheep and breed cattle and build a dry stone wall and, lay a hedge. Fantastic communicator with both exhibitors and members of the general public, and seems to really enjoy his day there, and I hope he does. I'm sure he does, otherwise he wouldn't come back again quite so much. But appears to get absolutely immersed in agriculture right up to here, which is fabulous.
There's no doubt that safeguarding traditional farming methods and the countryside is a cause close to his heart.
He's done a lot for farming. Like in the last 10 years, wool, for instance, has declined so much. So he went abroad and tried to promote British wool, and he did a good job. And we had a price increase around 25% for the last for that couple of years. But again, it's declining again. I said to him last June, it'd be very nice if you could go again to see if we can do something about the price. I'll take that on board, he said.
Ensuring the survival of rare native breeds is key to our agricultural heritage and one of Charles's passions, as he demonstrated on a visit to the National Trust's historic herd of White Park cattle at Dynevor Park near Llandelo.
It was a wonderful day. It was sunny, it was cold, the cattle were in the shed, and they are, of course, an iconic breed. They really are very special. And they're a beautiful cattle. It was lovely to see them on that day. I think they date back to the reign of Hywel Dda. They've always been a symbol of the power of Welsh princes, so it seemed particularly fitting that he was there to take an interest in that day. And I also believe that he made a very substantial, generous donation on his own behalf to purchasing a bull to help with the survival of the herd.
Has been a pioneer in that, way ahead of the game. And so the importance of his leadership, which may have not been appreciated perhaps as much as it should have been up to now, I think you'll find now has a huge resonance with where everybody is and where we've got to go.
Dynevor, home to the rare herd, is just one of many well-known landmarks cared for by the National Trust. Charles has been the charity's president for more than a quarter of a century. For him, it's as much about caring for the landscape as it is about preserving grand houses and treasures for the nation.
I would argue very strongly that his influence on what we have decided to do, particularly over the last 10 years, is very, very strong. He wants to protect these places because they're unique and they give back to the communities. But maybe particularly Dyffryn House and Tredegar and Bodnant, you will see the influence he's given about how we look after our landscape, our flowers, our trees.
In the Vale of Glamorgan, the Prince's views influence the way in which the renovation of Dyffryn House and its gardens is being carried out.
When he came here 2 or 3 years ago, we walked around the garden, and his interest was, obviously it was in the beautiful formal gardens, his interest was more in the wildness of the Arboretum. It was more in what are you growing in the greenhouse that we can use elsewhere. Would we have done so well without his passion and commitment and help? No. He's made it better for being our patron and being better for loving coming here.
It was the Prince's backing that inspired a campaign to restore a derelict castle on the North Wales coast to its former glory.
Every day I used to pass the castle to and from school, and I saw it deteriorate throughout the 1990s. And one summer I came back and the roof had been stripped off, the windows smashed, anything of any value taken. So I thought, who could help? Who could kind of advise? And at the age of 11 or 12, I wrote to the Prince to say, this wonderful building's at risk. Can you help? Please do something. And to my amazement, I heard back.
When Charles next visited the area, he asked to meet Mark to find out more and to offer help.
Just spend quite, half an hour, 45 minutes one-on-one with someone who had such knowledge and such interest that it just kept me, it got that kind of spark.
The Prince put Mark in contact with experts in the field, who then helped him set up the Grych Castle Preservation Trust on behalf of the nation.
To feel the energy of someone that's so passionate about the historic environment, you know, it was like a light bulb moment for me, and it's kind of prepared me for my life.
In 2006, the Prince began his own restoration project, buying a 19th century farm near the village of Myddfai in rural Carmarthenshire.
I'm thrilled that to be able to have somewhere at last in Wales that I can come to.
Does that make the
40 years too late.
People couldn't believe it, you know. We heard it on the radio. I was in the landroom and I heard it, and I came in. I said to the wife that the Prince of Wales is going to buy Llywelyn. And she said, "Oh, you're pulling my leg." And it was on the main news that night that he had purchased it from Stamford Hackety, and everybody was thrilled to hear the news.
It's important that he does have a home here in Wales because it's somewhere where he can come to escape. It's a very quiet, peaceful location, and it's very much a traditional Welsh farmhouse.
The 19th century farmstead was restored using traditional Welsh crafts and methods, combined with the latest green technology.
When he's building these buildings, he's not doing the show off. He's doing it so that he's making sure that the buildings are there for future generations as an example of how people should look after and how we convert our houses. He has taken a traditional Welsh cottage and restored it perfectly.
When I first went there, you kind of expect a palace, you know, you expect kind of Clarence House in the middle of a field, but you don't get that. I mean, it's a farmhouse, and it hasn't changed. I mean, it's been done up, of course.
It's somewhere he has spent time alone in the wake of some of the more difficult periods in the royal family's personal lives in recent years, and I think he sees it as a refuge.
The local community gave a warm welcome to the Prince and the Duchess of Cornwall.
He loves coming back. I always greet him, welcome home, because I think Myddfai is his home at the moment. He loves it, you know. He comes to the church every time he comes down on a Sunday. He's over the weekend. He always comes to church. No, there's no crowd coming to watch him. He calls in the hall every time he's down. He's a lovely person. They're lovely, both of them.
Charles's love of traditional architecture meant that he had very specific views when it came to a new village hall in Myddfai.
The hall was built by our late fathers in the 50s, and it had served its purpose. So we thought of building a new hall. And then Prince Charles came on board. He came to Myddfai, one of the earlier meetings. He came to the meeting and he said the architect had made a design of the new hall. It was like a rugby ball. And he didn't like it. He said plainly that night, "If you want me to put my shoulder behind it, I don't like it. You'll have to alter it." Well, so we employed another architect, and that was fantastic. And that's the existing hall now.
I've watched with fascination this project develop, and I'm thrilled, for what is worth, that my foundation played a small part, perhaps, in helping this project to become a reality.
He's also influenced a much larger Welsh architectural project. His vision of a people-friendly environment became key to the design of a new campus at Swansea University.
He'd taken interest in really levels of detail, which I think most people would find very surprising. For someone engaging in this project, it was actually quite irritating at one level, because you were commissioned essentially to produce a campus which was all about buildings. But of course, what His Royal Highness showed was it's not about buildings, it's about space. It's about sympathetic space.
And more than anything else, it's about creating an environment which inspires.
Dr. Miles Willis was impressed by the Prince's meticulous input during the design of the build.
Example now of His Royal Highness's influence on the architectural design of the accommodation. You've got that slightly different architectural feel in each of these buildings. They're all part of a one. The coloured bricks, the coloured tones in those, but then all of a sudden you've got these open spaces around. This is a great example of something the Prince was influential in the design process, of those fine little details that actually bring out the entirety of the space.
Church services mark important moments in the life of a nation. The 60th anniversary of the Queen's Dragoon Guards, known as the Welsh Cavalry, was just such an occasion.
He sees his real contribution as being one which can affirm certain aspects of society, certain organisations, by giving them the high-profile status that comes from a visit or from patronage. He's got a genuine interest in spirituality, whatever form it takes. I always believe that the best approach to religion is one which has a sense of generosity, of being willing to see what can be learned from whoever you encounter, whatever their faith position. And I'd have to say what I've observed is just that attitude from His Royal Highness.
Offering comfort and support when disaster strikes has always been a traditional role for the monarchy.
In 2012, St Asaph faced devastating floods. The lower part of the city was flooded, and there was even a death as a result of that flooding. Shortly afterwards, the Prince asked to visit the community. He wasn't really interested in meeting the great and the good. He wanted to meet those who had suffered because of the flood, those who had worked for the relief of the flood.
Eight years later, Pontypridd in southeast Wales was hit by severe flooding. Emma and Jez Jamal had spent years building up a business in the town centre.
So it was about 5:30 on the Sunday morning when I had a message from my friend saying the shop may have been affected. And when I arrived, there was about 5 foot of water.
Everything that we've kind of built together all kind of washed away. It was horrendous.
We thought that was the end of it, you know. There was no way of starting again. He genuinely wanted to know what happened about the business. He was concerned, and you could see it in the way that he was towards us. We couldn't see any way of moving forward, and after he came, he said, you know, don't give up. That genuinely gave us a hope, I think, to start again, which we then went on to do.
The opening of the Wales Millennium Centre in 2004 was a high point for the arts in Wales. It was a new home for the Welsh National Opera. The Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh were there to mark the occasion, alongside the opera company's patron, the Prince of Wales.
He's always been a patron of the arts. He's genuinely moved by music, by poetry and performance. Going to a place where music, song, and those forms of expression are so important will really have chimed with him.
Welsh soprano Catherine Jenkins has sung for the Prince on many occasions.
I was singing at the Royal Arboretum for the unveiling of the police memorial, and having not seen him for a few years because of the pandemic, we had, a really lovely chat about how did I, keep my voice going in the downtime of performing. And then I remember as he walked away, he said, "I do love the Welsh. God bless the Welsh." You can tell that his love of, music and the arts comes from a really genuine place. And I think because it is so authentic, he realises the power that the arts can have, in everybody's lives.
Composer Paul Mealer's relationship with the Prince has developed over many years.
Musically, I don't think there has been somebody in his position for a long time, that maybe since Queen Victoria, that actually knows so much about music. If you look at all of the life events that he has had, he has commissioned new music from Welsh composers for every one of them.
In 1981, Charles asked William Matthias to compose the anthem "Let the People Praise Thee" for his wedding to Lady Diana Spencer.
It kind of opened up the world to Welsh music, and so that anthem is sung everywhere. I mean, I was in New York, and 6 or 7 choirs were all singing that. Because they see that endorsement, then they think, oh, well, let's look at other Welsh composers.
In 2010, Paul was asked by the Prince to compose music for the wedding of Prince William and Kate Middleton.
I don't think it's well known. The Prince of Wales led the music for the service, and I know the couple were very much indebted to his advice on composers, on hymns and things like that. And a great deal of time was put into it by His Royal Highness to make sure that the music was exactly right, and I think he got it exactly right.
Paul's music was heard by almost 2 billion people worldwide.
It's very difficult, especially for up-and-coming composers, to get a foot in, because, we don't live in London, we don't live in New York, we don't have those kinds of opportunities. So having this, I think, is quite remarkable, that he supports us and enjoys doing so.
In 2000, the Prince revived the tradition of the royal harpist, which had lapsed during Queen Victoria's reign. Catherine Finch was the first to be appointed.
I quite often had to pinch myself. If you imagine I was living a student life, surviving on pennies and, that was the scene. But every now and then I'd have to put my posh frock in the car and the harp and go and drive into Buckingham Palace. The way I see it is, yes, it was a great privilege, and yes, it was a great honour to have this place, and it opened all these opportunities, and I hope that in return I was able to give enjoyment with my music and to add to the events that I played in,
Alice Hughes was appointed as royal harpist in 2019. As a result, she's played to audiences across the world.
I was very, very lucky to have been asked to go out to Japan to perform to coincide with His Royal Highness's visit over there back in October 2019. So it tied in with the Rugby World Cup over there, and I met so many fantastic people. I will always be grateful for this opportunity, and I think to follow in the footsteps of someone like Catherine Finch. I remember going to watch her play when I was around 10 years old and only starting Nun in the Heart, so it's quite special to be working alongside her now.
As Prince of Wales, Charles was to an extent free to pursue his own interests and causes. Now, as King Charles III, his every decision will be closely scrutinised in an ever-changing world.
The next 5-10 years will show whether King Charles III and the monarchy can survive as the connecting link which binds the Commonwealth and the British countries together.
I think Charles will make a great king. I think he is very sensitive, very thoughtful, and has reams of life experience to bring to the role. And I think if people give him a chance, I think they'll be quite impressed with him.
He makes things happen in a quiet way. It's not always about making a noise to achieve things. And I think Charles does that.
I think there's no doubt that he will face challenges because the political terrain is so unstable at the moment. So we have the threat of Brexit to the Good Friday Agreement in Northern Ireland. We have the threat to the Union of another potential independence referendum in Scotland. And we have our own debate in Wales about our own constitutional future.
He has tried to help in a practical way. Not just having ideas that sound good on paper, but actually making them work in practice.
He will have a quite difficult time, but I think that he's learned from past mistakes, and so he will be a good king.
The opening of the Wales Millennium Centre in 2004 was a high point for the arts in Wales. It was a new home for the Welsh National Opera. The Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh were there to mark the occasion, alongside the opera company's patron, the Prince of Wales.
He's always been a patron of the arts. He's genuinely moved by music, by poetry and performance. Going to a place where music, song, and those forms of expression are so important will really have timed with him.
Welsh soprano Catherine Jenkins has sung for the Prince on many occasions.
I was singing at the Royal Arboretum for the unveiling of the police memorial, and having not seen him for a few years because of the pandemic, we had, a really lovely chat about how did I, keep my voice going in the downtime of performing. And then I remember as he walked away, he said, "I do love the Welsh. God bless the Welsh." You can tell that his love of, music and the arts comes from a really genuine place. And I think because it is so authentic, he realizes the
Trong phim có nhẹ, phim có nhẹ, phim có nhẹ, phim có nhẹ, 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 nhẹ. Có ai trong phim có nhẹ, 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 nhẹ. Có ai trong phim có nhẹ, 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 nhẹ. Có ai trong phim có nhẹ. Đi khám da liễu về, bác sĩ bảo có ai trong tim không nhỉ? Tim không nhỉ? Tim không nhỉ? Tim không nhỉ? Nhỉ, 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 nhỉ. Có ai trong tim không nhỉ? Đi khám da liễu về, bác sĩ bảo có ai trong tim không nhỉ? Tim không nhỉ? Tim không nhỉ? Tim không nhỉ? Đi khám da liễu về, bác sĩ bảo có ai trong tim không nhỉ?
Because they see that endorsement, then they think, oh, well, let's look at other Welsh composers.
In 2010, Paul was asked by the Prince to compose music for the wedding of Prince William and Kate Middleton.
I don't think it's well known. The Prince of Wales led the music for the service, and I know the couple were very much indebted to his advice on composers, on hymns and things like that. And a great deal of time was put into it by His Royal Highness to make sure that the music was exactly right. And I think he got it exactly right.
Paul's music was heard by almost 2 billion people worldwide.
It's very difficult, especially for up-and-coming composers, to get a foot in because, you know, we don't live in London, we don't live in New York, we don't have those kinds of opportunities. So having this, I think, is quite remarkable that he supports us and enjoys doing so.
In 2000, the Prince revived the tradition of the royal harpist, which had lapsed during Queen Victoria's reign. Catherine Finch was the first to be appointed.
I quite often had to pinch myself. If you imagine I was living a student life, surviving on pennies and, you know, that was the scene. But every now and then I'd have to put my posh frock in the car and the harp and go and drive into Buckingham Palace. The way I see it is, yes, it was a great privilege, and yes, it was a great honour to have this place, and it opened all these opportunities, and I hope that in return I was able to give enjoyment with my music and to add to the events that I played in, you know.
Alice Hughes was appointed as royal harpist in 2019. As a result, she's played to audiences across the world.
I was very, very lucky to have been asked to go out to Japan to perform to coincide with His Royal Highness's visit over there back in October 2019. So it tied in with the Rugby World Cup over there, and I met so many fantastic people. I will always be grateful for this opportunity, and I think to follow in the footsteps of someone like Catherine Finch. I remember going to watch her play when I was around 10 years old and only starting None in the Harp, so it's quite special to be working alongside her now.
As Prince of Wales, Charles was to an extent free to pursue his own interests and causes. Now, as King Charles III, his every decision will be closely scrutinised in an ever-changing world.
The next 5-10 years will show whether King Charles III and the monarchy can survive as the connecting link which binds the Commonwealth and the British countries together.
I think Charles will make a great king. I think he is very sensitive, very thoughtful, and has reams of life experience to bring to the role. And I think if people give him a chance, I think they'll be quite impressed with him.
He makes things happen in a quiet way. It's not always about making a noise to achieve things. And I think Charles does that.
I think there's no doubt that he will face challenges because the political terrain is so unstable at the moment. So we have the threat of Brexit to the Good Friday Agreement in Northern Ireland. We have the threat to the Union of another potential independence referendum in Scotland. And we have our own debate in Wales about our own constitutional future.
He has tried to help in a practical way, not just having ideas that sound good on paper, but actually making them work in practice.
He will have a quite difficult time, but I think that he's learned from past mistakes, and so he will be a good king.